I'm Captain Brad Arlett, Spokane Police Department, Investigative Division. This is Lieutenant Steve Wool, Spokane Police Department, Investigative Division. What we're going to brief on today is the officer-involved shooting review from January 15th, 2017, involving Dexter Dumars, whose date of birth was 10/15 of 1983. The officer involved using lethal force in this case was Corporal Ryan Jamison. And again, this occurred on January 15th, 2017 at 5th and Walnut. And the way we're going to work this is I'm going to have Lieutenant Wool review some of the facts of the case. We will then introduce some things that we're going to see on the body camera release. Of course, everybody will get the entire thing. We've condensed it down just to hit some of the high points that we're going to discuss in the release. And then we'll be available for a few clarifying questions about the release that we're making and any questions associated with some of the information that we're sharing related to that. So, let's go ahead.
Okay. So, on January 15th, 2017, at approximately 0030 hours, SPD Officer Mark Zimmerman was patrolling an area at 9th and Adams in Spokane, which was designated a hotspot due to the increased criminal activity in that area. Officer Zimmerman contacted Dexter M. Dumars, 10/15 of 83, who was standing in the middle of the road wearing dark clothing. When asked for his name and date of birth, Mr. Dumars lied to Officer Zimmerman, giving him both a fictitious name and age. Mr. Dumars later admitted that he lied and that he believed he had a probation warrant for his arrest. Believing him to have a felony Department of Corrections warrant, Officer Zimmerman instructed Mr. Dumars to turn around and drop his backpack that he was wearing. Mr. Dumars at that time produced a knife from his waistband, extending the 4 to 6 inch blade towards Officer Zimmerman as he drew it. Officer Zimmerman was in close proximity to Mr. Dumars and the knife at this point, and he feared he would be stabbed or killed by Mr. Dumars. Officer Zimmerman began to draw his sidearm as he felt his life was in grave danger. As he did this, Mr. Dumars fled northbound on foot with the knife in hand. Officer Zimmerman broadcasted via radio that the suspect had produced a knife and fled on foot. While pursuing him on foot, Officer Zimmerman deployed his taser, striking Dumars in the back. The taser had no effect on Dumars, who continued to flee with knife in hand. Due to the inclement weather, Officer Zimmerman fell several times on the ice, injuring his left wrist and hand in the process. Officer Corrigan Mohondo responded to the area, as did several other officers. Officer Mohondo located Dumars at 6th and Cedar as he fled northbound and could easily see the knife in his hand. He joined the foot pursuit and was close enough at one point to deploy his taser, striking Mr. Dumars a second time. Just like the first deployment, this one had no effect on him. At this point, officers had identified themselves, demanded Dumars stop fleeing, and attempted 2 taser applications. When the opportunity presented itself, Officer Mohondo utilized a baton strike to Dumars' arm in an attempt to get him to drop the knife. This alternative application of force did not work, and Dumars continued to flee, maintaining control of the knife. Officer Nate Donaldson and Officer Kelsey Scott arrived in the area and also attempted to stop Dumars. Both also utilized their tasers at different times in order to stop Dumars from fleeing with the knife. Again, both applications failed to stop Dumars, and he continued to flee with a knife in his hand. Mr. Dumars had run to 5th and Walnut, which is an intersection with exiting vehicles from I-90. 3 vehicles were stopped at that intersection, and Mr. Dumars proceeded towards the civilian-occupied vehicles. Corporal Ryan Jamison had arrived at the intersection and deployed his department rifle after hearing the dangerous foot pursuit with an armed individual. As Mr. Dumars continued towards the occupied citizen vehicles with a knife in hand, Corporal Jamison fired 4 rounds from his rifle, striking Mr. Dumars. Mr. Dumars fell within a short distance to those vehicles. Officers safely approached Dumars, removed the knife, and began life-saving measures. Mr. Dumars died at the scene. Corporal Jameson stated that he was aware that Mr. Dumars had committed a felony assault by pulling the knife on officers, that several other means to stop Mr. Dumars had been tried and failed. He felt that both officers' and citizens' lives were in danger by Mr. Dumars, who had the knife, and was actively fleeing from police. Corporal Jameson determined that he needed to end the situation before citizens were hurt. He felt no other force options would have been reasonable at that time, and he made the decision to deploy deadly force. At the time of that incident, Mr. Dumars was wanted for a parole violation by the Department of Corrections. His toxicology report showed that he had both amphetamine and methamphetamine in his system. The Spokane Prosecutor's Office determined that Corporal Ryan Jameson was justified in the use of deadly force while attempting to arrest Dexter Dumars. The Spokane County Prosecutor's Office writes, upon arriving near the intersection at 5th and Walnut, Dumars, who had slowed to a steady but deliberate walk, accelerated to a run and diagonally towards one of several cars that had stopped at the light. The immediate concern was that Dumars may attack or take a hostage of one of the vehicle's occupants. Corporal Ryan Jameson, who had taken a position behind and slightly to the left of Dumars, fired 4 shots. Aid was rendered, but Dumars was pronounced dead at the scene. Under these circumstances, it was reasonable for Corporal Jameson to use deadly force. Dumars presented a serious and immediate threat to officers and to the safety of others who were stopped at that traffic light. Multiple prior police commands and several attempts with less lethal force had been attempted to dissuade and or stop Dumars. There is no indication Corporal Jameson acted out of malice or lacked good faith belief in the correctness of his actions. Therefore, no criminal liability attaches and no criminal charges will be filed against Corporal Jameson.
We're going to show you 3 body camera segments. The first one starts with the initial contact with Officer Zimmerman. We will end that at about the point where Officer Mahandro's body camera takes over, which will be the second segment. Those are overlapped just about exactly. The last segment we'll show you is from Officer Donaldson's body camera, and this is just all for reference, which is some of the same view of the final portion of the incident from Officer Mahandro's body camera, but you see it from another officer that's, you know, in about the same place at just a little bit of a different angle. And during those body camera views, you'll see and hear the multiple attempts at a taser application. You'll see the other baton strike, and you'll see several incidents where the officers advised Dumars that he was under arrest and that he needed to stop running and to drop the knife. So if you could start with the first one of those, please.
Where you coming from?
The apartment's right down there.
Okay. Why are you just chilling in the middle of the street?
I'm trying to button my coat.
There would have been like something good to do inside the house, don't you think?
Yeah, but I didn't think it was gonna be that cold.
Okay, where's your apartments?
Right down there, and then the second one's on the end.
What's the numbers?
I don't know the numbers. It's my friend's house. I'm staying the night there.
Okay. Do you have a ID on you?
No, I do not.
You don't have any ID on you?
No.
You walking through? Where are you going?
Right up to Zip Trip.
Zip Trip?
Yep.
What's your first name?
Randy.
Randy?
Yep.
Randy, what's your last name?
Colvin.
Colvin? Yeah. C-O-L-V-I-N?
Yes.
What's your middle initial, Randy?
M.
Date of birth?
10/15/83.
Where are you from, Randy?
Here, Spokane.
Okay. Is your ID from Washington then?
Should be.
Okay. What's a good phone number for you?
I don't have one.
Phone number? Where you live right now?
Homeless.
You're home? Okay. Just couch surfing?
Yep.
Okay. Why not stay out of the cold right now at 12:30 at your friend's house?
'Cause we need milk.
At 12:30?
Yeah.
Why do you need milk right now?
so we can cook breakfast.
Okay, in the morning? Why didn't you just go in the morning?
Because you don't want to wait till the morning. And they asked if I'd go.
Heck, I would wait till the morning. I'd sleep right now. Tell
Kinda
them it's 2 degrees outside. You go get your milk.
Well, when your couch serving, they ask
Gotcha.
if you'll go and
Gotcha.
do something.
You ever been arrested before?
No.
Never? How old are you?
30.
You sure about that?
Yeah.
Why all the hesitation with all your answers?
Because I just woke up.
No, come on, man. I can just
Yeah.
wake up and I can spout off everything I know real quick.
Well, I just literally got out of bed.
So you're 30 years old.
Yes.
Okay. Are you sure about that?
Yes.
And what's your date of birth?
10/15/83.
Okay. That doesn't make you 30.
At least 34. Sorry.
Wow, dude. So who are you really? And if you have some silly warrants, I don't care. If it's a felony warrant, yeah, you'll go with me tonight. So what's your real name?
I believe I will. Right. My last name is Dumars.
For what?
Probation violation.
So it's going to be a felony warrant.
Possibly.
DOC. Okay. Yeah, just take your backpack off. Don't do anything silly, okay? Face away from me. Turn around, face away from me. No, turn around. Turn around. Don't do it, dude. Drop it, taser, 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 taser. 7-2, I got one running southbound Adams. He pulled the knife on me. Drop it, I'm gonna shoot! Drop it, I will shoot! Failed taser deployment. Drop the knife! Drop the knife! You're gonna get shot! Drop the knife! Drop it! Sir, I don't want to shoot you, but I will. Drop it now! Last warning! West 6. West on 6. Crossing Cedar. North. Hush. Stop, dude. Six. You still got a knife. You still got a knife, Bo, right ahead. Still got a knife. Get on the ground! Get on the ground. So one, taser deployed, no effect. Show me your hands! Get on the ground!
Drop the knife! Drop the knife!
Drop it!
Drop the knife! Drop it!
I'm gonna try another index. I dropped it. Drop the knife! Drop the knife! Drop the knife right now!
1, next unit deploy a long gun. We're right at Maple and 5th now.
Get on the ground! Hey!
Get away! Shots fired, shots fired.
Get back! Get back! Get out! Get back!
Clarifications or questions?
Who was he shouting get back to? Was it the civilians?
No. So the gentleman who was yelling "get back" was one of our SWAT tactical officers. So he was directing the other officers. They didn't know what, if any other weapons he had, if he had access to a gun, to other knives, and so he wanted them to get back so they could safely approach to where they could render aid, but safely. So I think you guys could see in that video, the officers on multiple occasions put themselves in a dangerous situation, both applying tasers and other means to try to disarm Mr. Dumars. We as law enforcement officers realize that we're going to put ourselves in that situation, and they continue to do that for several minutes, attempting to get him stopped without it having to go to a lethal, deadly force situation. They made the decision once he started going and aggressing on civilians in a parked car where there's innocent persons, he's putting himself close to them. That's when they made the decision at that point to apply deadly force to stop that threat, not knowing what his intentions were at that time.